Hello, this is Sarah, and today I'm going to run you through a little tutorial of one way to make feathers. So to start off, I'm going to have some jewelry wire. This is a 24 gauge jewelry wire, and I just cut it into little pieces about the size that I want my feathers to be. You don't have to worry about them being exactly the same size. I have some longer ones that I'll use for the tail feathers and some shorter ones for the top of the wings. And I just mix them all together. The other thing you'll need is some fabric fusing tape. You can use the tape. You can also use a sheet of it. They both work. The thinner your fusing fabric, the more flexible your wings are going to be. If you use a heavier duty fabric, they're going to be good for stiffer wings. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am laying out a thin layer of wool that's going to be the bottom layer of my wings. Now you don't want this layer to be too thick. You want it thick enough so that when you put your fusing tape, it's not touching the parchment underneath, but the top layer of wool is the only thing that's going to actually stick to the fusing tape. So you don't need to make it a thick layer. The best thing to do is to just do multiple thin layers. It's going to work best in the end. I'm working on a sandpiper right now. The wings are multicolored brown and white. And I'm going to mix the two, and then when I put the wings on the sandpiper, I'll touch them up with darker brown or white wherever is needed. But for right now, for my basic wings, I'm just going to work on mixing the colors together to create that multicolor effect. So you want it to be about as wide as you want your wings to be. A little wider is not a problem because you can always trim off the end or fold it over. You're just going to lay out your bottom layer. So after I have my bottom on, I'm going to use some fusing tape. In this case, I'm going to use 2 because it's a little wider than 1. And when that's down, I'm going to take my wire and I'm going to lay it lightly on top. Just want to be careful laying these down that you settle them nicely. This is already my second video because I caught it with my hand and sent them flying. But as you can see, I have all different sizes in here since I'll use different sizes for different parts of the bird. You don't need them that far apart. You want to have enough room to cut it, to have the feathers on each side of the wire. But you really don't need that much on your feathers before they become too big. So I'm just going to lay all these out. You'll see that my wire doesn't reach the end. That's okay. For these, I intend to just cut off the ends anyways. For a larger bird, when I do this, I would probably have the wire actually stick part way off. And then I'd use that as I attach it. But this is a little bit of a smaller bird. So I'm just going to go with them like this. Oops. You could do this without the wire. You could just do the fusing tape and the wool, but I like the effect that the wire gives. All right, so now after I have that on, now I'm going to add a real thin layer because I want the tape to stick to itself and to the wire. But I do just want to add a little bit of this darker color on the inside. Now I'm going to do 2 layers of the fusing tape. But if you want to have a thicker feather, you can do as many as you'd like. So 1, 2. And now I am just going to cover it up with another layer of wool. And this layer can be a little bit thicker, kind of like your bottom layer. Once you iron it, you'll see that there might be some flyaway pieces of the wool, and you'll just be able to pull those off, any excess wool. A little bit of light brown in here. So this is merino wool that I'm using. I like how it pulls off in the long strands, but you can use Cordale wool, anything you want. I'd say carded wool would be hard because the pieces of it are so small and it's so mixed up. So probably best to stick to any kind of wool with long fibers. And again, don't stress about what this looks like. After we iron it, we'll look at it, we'll see what we want to do. Okay, so once I have it all in place, I'm going to take my parchment paper, that's what this is, and I'm going to lay it over the top. And I'm going to take my iron, and you want to do pretty much what the instructions on your fusing tape call for. I usually do it on the wool setting on this iron. And you're just going to give it enough heat so that the fusing tape melts onto the wool. I'm working on a felt pad that I use for needle felting, but you can also just use a towel or an ironing board, whatever's easiest. And I like to iron both sides just to make sure all that fusing tape has had a chance to melt. All right, so then we're going to open it up. It will stick a little bit, that's fine. So you'll see you've got a much thinner piece. Now I don't want those black pieces to be so visible, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do one more layer to hide them on the side that's going to be on top. A lot of times I'll use a silver wire for birds that are on the lighter side that have white in their wings, but I ran out, so I'm having to make do with the black. But you'll see by the time you add another layer, they really won't be that noticeable. Layer it on. Birds with only one color in their wings are a lot easier. Okay, so I'm going to close this guy again. Iron it one more time. So you can see how I have a little bit that isn't completely attached. That's the stuff that'll pull off. But what I'm actually going to do now is take my ends and I'm just going to fold them in a little bit. And needle felt them down. This is just going to take a lot of those flyaways and tack them in. So it's just kind of covering that end, and it's covering these little bits of wire a little bit more. So when you iron this, always make sure that you do it between sheets of parchment paper, because as you melt the glue, it can stick to either your pad or your iron. So you can see how folding that over has made those little wires a little bit less noticeable. And then you don't have to do this, but I like to kind of go over the whole thing. And I give it a once over just to make sure the wool is embedded in the fusing fabric. Just keeps it held together a little bit better. And so we're going to iron it one more time after this. And so all those little pieces of wool that you're pushing into between the pieces of fusing tape are going to be connected to it that much better. And they'll be less likely to peel off. So you can see on this side, you can really see the wires, but that's going to be my underside, so it's not that important. And I just keep going with this until I'm happy with how it's connected, but I'm going to stop it there so it doesn't take too long. I'm going to pop this guy back in between, and I'm going to iron it one last time. Now, the next step is to cut your wings. So you're just going to cut right in between all of those. I said wings, it should have been feathers. In between all of those little pieces of wire. You can see it a little better on this side. Some of them will be thicker, some of them will be thinner. But that works well for different layers of bird wings. Okay, and then once you have your piece cut, you're just going to shape it up. It's a little bit more of a wing-like shape. You'll pull a little bit of that excess off. Not a wing-like shape, a feather shape, that's twice. And then you have your feathers. I'm just going to trim them up and pull some of that loose stuff off. And you can start to see how they're going to look as they stack together. I usually stack a couple rows. I'll put a row down, And I'll use some of my wool to make sure it's securely attached. So I'd have wool here that I needle felt in to hold my wings down, and then I'd work on my second layer. So I won't bore you with my cutting all of these, but just to give you an idea. So that's what your wings are going to look like. So that's 3 layers of the fusing fabric. You can see they're still very thin, but I could go with just 2. I could go with just 1 layer and have them really thin, or I could keep going if I wanted them to be thicker. But these feathers are now ready to put on my bird. And this, the 24 gauge wire is so thin, I don't really have a problem with it breaking my needles. If I do a larger bird with the thicker gauge, it might a little bit, but these aren't too bad. So then once I get them in place, I'll just round them up exactly how I want them. So that's just one way to make some feathers for your bird. Let me know if you like it.